Hello, everyone. Welcome to class. My name is Alberto Carbo with the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this very exciting, very apropos class called Bitter Herbs. And if you are in the webinar tonight, welcome. As always, you are welcome to participate, and I will point out how you can do that in a second. But for all of you who are catching us live on YouTube, this is a free preview of what this class will be like. And it's a great way to get a snapshot of what classes at the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism are like. In particular, the monthly class that we have once a month called Herbs A to Z. And you'll get to see how Phyllis and Matthew, who are here with me today, Matthew Wood and Phyllis Delight, weave in their decades of experience and knowledge about herbs, clinical practice, and different experiences that they've had throughout their careers into this beautiful mosaic of just herbal knowledge and something that we can all learn from and apply it to our personal lives, or if we are clinicians and practice ourselves, little tidbits and nuggets of information that can help us become better clinicians. And I will also bring you to the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com and show you some of the things that you could be interested in at the moment. But before we do, I'll of course tell you about the class tonight. It's Bitter Herbs. And if this is a free class, so if you can still join us for the webinar, all you have to do is go to the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com, and I'll show you where you can do that in a second. But in ancient times, bitter herbs were a springtime staple all over the world, and aiding digestion and metabolism after winter's scarcity. So this tradition intertwined with religious rituals like Passover and Easter meals, and today bitter herbs are often replaced by milder options like horseradish. This class demystifies bitterness, and it's akin to unsweetened coffee or chocolate, not acrid like bile. We'll delve into common bitters like dandelion and barely bitter options like barberry root, and intense choices as well like wormwood. And we will also honor Marrubium, known as maror or mara in Hebrew, and originally eaten at Passover. And this class is the perfect complement for Green Thursday, which Hildegard von Bingen was all about. And that class is free as well. And you can find it on the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism YouTube channel. So I will bring you briefly to the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism.com. And as I mentioned, this class is a great little snippet of what the monthly Herbs A to Z classes are like at the Institute. And you can find those by clicking on all courses. It will bring you to this page here. You can always search A to Z if you don't see it, but if you see it, you can click on it. I have it open here. And of course, take all the time you need to read the class description and read all about what's included. But my favorite part is where you get to see all the different classes that are included in the subscription. It is $24 a month. And while you are subscribed, you get access to the entire archive of classes, as well as, of course, the one live class or live webinar per month. So if you click show more, it'll show you, and I'll scroll slowly so as not to give you a headache. But as you can see, the plethora of topics is incredible. There are over 70 two-hour classes on all sorts of herbal related topics. You have topics like the extracellular matrix, the lymphatic system, Native American heritage gift of the female remedies, holly and bat medicine, Schisandra, sumac, and rowan, and so on. So right in those few examples that I named there, you have some animal medicines, you have body systems, you have specific indications, and a whole bunch of other topics, all 2 hours long, with Matthew in every class and world-class teachers that he invites to join him, like Phyllis tonight. And I will bring you back to the homepage. This is where you can always find out about what is going on at the Institute. We try and keep it as current as possible. But if you do want to stay on top of things and on top of all the things that we offer, the best thing to do is to sign up for the newsletter. It's right front and center for you. Just click on it and enter your details, and then you'll receive our newsletter and notifications about all of the things that we are working hard to make available. If you do want to join us tonight, simply go to the homepage, click on this green icon here by the Bitter Herbs class card, and you'll receive a Zoom invitation link, and you can join us in the webinar, ask any questions that come to mind. And for other classes you may be interested in, the herbs for the musculoskeletal system, of course, this is the structure of our body, and it is very important. And so many people today walk around with body aches and pain. And in this class, Matthew and Phyllis, who have over 70 years of clinical experience combined, take us through the musculoskeletal system. But you also get access to free classes, free previews before the paid class. So you can actually only tune into the free classes if you want, and as well as, of course, sign up for the paid class. But the free classes on their own are absolutely worth checking out. You have the free first aid for herbalist for acute conditions, and that's class number 2 of the first aid for herbalist series. And you also have a Q&A with Matthew and Phyllis. And if you want to learn more about this class, the 4-hour class, by the way, is on next Friday, the 26th. But you can click on the green icon here and find out all about herbs for the musculoskeletal system. And for another free offering, which we can't go on without mentioning it because it is so incredible, and really just a wealth of information that you can download and even print if you like, bring it with you, but it is just fantastic. You get a little snippet here. These are the free set of Materia Medica cards. And as you can see, you get really nice images of the different parts of the plant. So you get familiarized with the plant. And then on the second part of the card, you get the family or botanical family name and the botanical name of the plant, as well as very concisely presented, but very important information, such as the tissue states, the energetics and tastes, the organ affinities, and some herbal actions and uses. And there are over 50 different plants in this free set of Materia Medica cards. So all you need to do is click on the green link over here, follow the prompts, and you'll be able to access, view, download, and even print these beautiful creations by Matthew and Lee Arnoldy, who teaches the Doctrine of Signatures course. And if you do want to get on the list for physical copies that get mailed to your house, get on the list because they will be for sale soon once again. Of course, lastly, I'll mention the Matthew Wood Institute of Herbalism Year 1 program, very comprehensive and year-long, a stepping stone on your herbal journey that will serve you for years to come. And you can learn all about it here. And it is worth mentioning that on Earth Day, which is next Monday, we will be announcing and releasing the MWH scholarship program. So for any of you who are out there who are interested, but perhaps are not ready for that level of commitment or have some difficulties there, you need to definitely stay tuned, and best way is sign up for the newsletter and find out all about the scholarship program. So without further delay, back to our regularly scheduled programming. We have Bitter Herbs tonight with Matthew Wood and Phyllis C. Light. And if you're in the webinar, to participate, there's 2 ways as always. You've got the Q&A in the chat. Let us know where you're joining from and anything you want to share in the chat, any experiences with plants, any anecdotes, and make sure there's a little tab that says 207 panels. So just click on that and make sure that it says everyone to ensure that everybody can get your message. And if you do have questions for the teachers, the best place to put those is in the Q&A. Click on the Q&A icon. You'll find it at the bottom of your Zoom screen. That's just so that The questions don't get lost in the chat. They're very important. We don't want to lose them, of course. And without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Matthew and Phyllis for bitter herbs.
Mhm. Greetings, folks. Yeah. Let's see. Yes, well, Alberto covered a lot of the basics. People would take bitters in the spring. I suppose they do that in the South? There was
Yes.
greens or both kind of
Yeah,
green.
kind of greens, winter clean, get rid of all the fats and yuck, is supposed to clean out your system from a winter of eating heavy grains and fats, lots of starches and fats.
Oh, and so, and what would you say? Salted pork and things like that.
Yes, yeah, yes, salted pork definitely, and and whatever grains had been stored to eat. Which grain, which is mostly corn. Corn was the grain.
Yeah.
So a diet of heavy corn and salted pork over the winter. Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, that was pretty universal, and it blends in with the greens. That we had the class on Green Thursday, which, yeah, overlaps some with Hildegard's Green Power, but Green Thursday is actually older than her. We learned at the end of that class that it was actually it's the Sabbath dinner for Jesus and his disciples. It was the Last Supper, actually, commemorates that day. But at any rate, so eating greens, and a lot of them are somewhat bitter. Dandelion greens are a little bitter, etc. And so that overlaps some, but then we have the bitter herbs, and I thought we would talk about different kinds of bitters, and some of them are going to be the bitters of spring, and some of them just some other ones we wanted to study. Certainly, dandelion green or root would be a number one bitter. I count that as a moderate bitter. And then we had, oh, I thought we'd talk about, yeah, sorry, I don't know how to turn that off, that bell. Then we would have American ginseng. I thought would be very interesting because it's so both dandelion root and American ginseng are bitter and sweet, which means they get secretions going and in your mouth, and you can taste it, because the two things that get secretions going in your mouth are bitters and sweets. So that, whereas astringent and sour stops them, so dries out your mouth. So they were used, so they have a similarity, but American ginseng was never a spring green. I mean, a spring bitter.
No, no, it wasn't.
No. And to
No,
us herbalists, it doesn't really taste very bitter, but I've heard other people say, "Oh, ick, it's so bitter." It's like, what?
true.
And yeah, so then moderate bitters are more like barberry root, Oregon grapefruit, and blessed thistle. We wanted to do blessed thistle, which is not really a spring bitter, maybe, but it's very important bitter especially for breaking down hormones. And that means also building up hormonal shifts. And then we have the very intense bitters like wormwood and white horehound, which are really also we wanted to differentiate between the bitters and the so in America, and I've noticed in other countries too, but I can't really generalize quite as easily. In America, at least, if something doesn't taste good, people say, "Oh, ick, it's bitter." And
Right.
that's like, they don't even know what bitter is, because the only things that are bitter in America pretty much are coffee and chocolate. And so, like at Passover, so Passover we'll get to in a moment, but instead of bitters, people use the horseradish, which is not milder, it's just different. Um,
Right.
so we have so we have both ceremonial. Well, so people were eating bitters in the spring, and that became religious practices. So the other flavor that's so similar is the acrid flavor, which is like valerian, the yuck flavor, the taste of bile in your throat, or the vomit flavor. Ugh. And that makes you, shiver. So valerian, geez, I mean, it goes all the way from that's like kid stuff to like peyote, and all the hallucinogens have the acrid flavor, all the alkaloids, that is. So when we run across alkaloids in herbal medicine, they have that acrid flavor, which is not one of the main really 5 real flavors that physiologists talk about, but it's the taste of bile in your throat, which is um so
That would be poke greens.
oh, okay.
Poke
Yeah,
greens are bitter and acrid. I mean, this was after they were cooked and water thrown away, cooked, water thrown away, cooked, water thrown away, cooked and eaten. They still were like bitter and acrid, but
and green.
digest and green. Yeah, the color really didn't change all that much, and tasty enough now to eat. Right.
Yeah, and that was subsistence diet. Probably as soon as they could afford lettuce, they probably gave up on poke greens.
Yeah, and what is also very popular here are garden greens, turnip greens, and mustard greens just go wild. So now you can
Yeah,
wild pick
yeah,
mustard greens, right? And collard greens.
yeah.
So those were like planted in like February, and then you could eat them by late March.
Mm. Yeah, so uh so we see some overlap there with the greens and the bitters. Yeah, I gotta admit, I never liked those kinds of intense greens that much. So,
You mean
but
like the garden greens, the
yeah,
mustard? Okay, yeah, I
yeah,
do.
not that bad, but I don't like collards for some reason. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever have them with hot pepper sauce on them?
Yep.
Nope, or yep. I couldn't
No, that's
understand.
it. No.
Yeah, that's the traditional way to eat them in the South is hot pepper sauce on top of your greens, a vinegar pepper sauce.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. So the bitters, there's a bunch of different uh substances or what. So in herbalism, scientific herbalism, first there's like crazy metaphysical herbalism, like me and Phyllis maybe even, but then there's mm, semi-scientific herbalism where they just break it down to tannins, its astringents, or polyphenols or phenols or um, flavonoids and so on and so forth. And um, those, and then triterpenoids and monoterpenoids and essential essential oils and so on. So the bitters are the polyphenols and the phenols, I believe, and actually, but I mean, it's kind of amazing how some things are bitter we would never use as a spring bitter, like cyanide, like wild cherry. That's bitter too, and yet that's a very different kind of that's the bitter almond flavor,
Hmm.
and not used that way. It's too toxic. So, yeah, so we have some pharmacology for reasons for, so these bitters, they tend to cause digestive secretion and metabolic secretion. So, and herbalists, when we say the liver, we mean the metabolism, because all the cells metabolize. So if you take St. John's wort, it's not just affecting the liver, it's affecting the pathway, the phase one in all cells, not just the liver, because almost all of them metabolize. A few of them are like in another dimension, like red blood cells. So don't have that mechanism. Um, so so it's metabolism and digestion, and um, that's there's some herbs that do both, and some that do one, and some do the other, etc. You got any further comments
Well,
on?
I would say the one thing that all bitter herbs have in common is the secretion of bile. All bitter herbs cause the gallbladder to contract and to secrete some bile. So, I mean, I can't think of a bitter herb that doesn't do that. So that's going to affect how we're digesting our food and how we're metabolizing fat. And so the question is, do you have your bitter at the beginning of the meal or at the end of the meal? So there's debate even among the herbal community. So if you have, let's say, your tincture of a combination of bitters, do you take it when you sit down to eat, or do you take it when you finish eating? Ultimately the goal is to increase digestive capacity, release bile, break down fat. So when do you take your bitters?
Oh, I don't know. When do you take your bitters?
Well, I actually like it at the end of the meal because that gives it time, the stomach time to do its job. And move the food through the stomach down to the duodenum, down to the small intestines, which is where the bile needs to come in at. And bitters work pretty darn quick on releasing bile. So I like to do it and suggest my clients do it at the end of the meal, which would be kind of like following the natural process of the body.
Okay, I'm just trying to cut off that. Well, the do not disturb is on. I'm getting this bell. I don't know if you guys hear it. Let's see, this ringing. Yeah, I like to eat sour things at the end of a meal, so I would not, I haven't really eaten bitter things consciously like at the beginning, but yeah, sour and astringent kind of stops your hunger. So it's that's why certain fruits are sour. Okay, so there's anything else you can think of?
Not on generally. I think we've kind of painted a pretty decent picture of bitters. I will say there are bitter receptors all over the body, not just in the small intestines, but the lungs have bitter receptors. And even though we're not going to be talking about the herbs tonight, most herbs for the lungs are also very bitter. And so, right, so they have discovered that scientifically and physiologically that the lungs, especially the bronchial tubes, have a lot of bitter receptors.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so some of those lung remedies are bitter. Yeah, that would help getting secretions going there as well.
Right, like make a productive cough.
Yeah, right.
Right. And most antispasmodic herbs are also bitter.
Yeah, though that's overlapping with the acrid flavor a lot.
Yes.
Yeah. You get some things like bone set, I would say is a good example, and even wild lettuce, so that means lettuce is bolted, are bitter and acrid, and they make you go, oh, and that acrid flavor does that, huh, and that shows you how it's unraveling spasms and things. It's going deep into the sympathetic, into the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so that's bitters in general. Then we get to Passover, and undoubtedly the ancient Hebrews were eating bitters like everybody else, and then the priest came along and said, well, let's make this part of our observances. And what would it I mean, maybe God told him or something, but um, then the idea came, well, let's eat bitters during our Passover meal, which is celebrating our leaving Egypt, getting out of slavery in Egypt. And so bitters were eaten then, which is Passover starts this Friday. Well, it'll be tomorrow, I guess, or fairly soon here. And the bitters we eat to remember the suffering of our ancestors in Egypt, which I say include myself, since my mom's a Jew and I get in on that. And but that's what the phrase during the Passover Seder or meal. And then we have bitters, and the way it's done, and this must be a Eastern European Ashkenazi tradition, because because Eastern Europeans eat horseradish. It's very German and Eastern European. It's not very English or French or Italian or Sephardic, or that is Mediterranean. And so they came to America and they were already, or they began to substitute the bitters with the horseradish, which is not a bitter. I got kind of, this is the one thing about the Passover Seder that kind of offends me. It's not a bitter. And it seems to me that it is really important to have a bitter, because a bitter, in many ways, the bitters actually do release bitter experiences and stuff. Like willow in the Bach flower remedies. Willow is bitter. Well, it's kind of chalky, but it's kind of a chalky bitter. The aspirins, the salicylates they have kind of a dry taste. But with willow, they're kind of combined with a bitter, and that's a remedy for pain. And in the Bach flower essences, it's a remedy for resentment, which is bitterness. So I do think it's important, and I encourage anybody who's having a Passover Seder to actually eat bitters. And so a bitter would be like, like a carrot gets bitter sometimes, and not all the time. You could buy a bunch of carrots and only one or two might be a little bitter in the core. But yeah, so try to maybe get some bitters. And in fact, at most Passover Seders, the horseradish would be wrapped in a lettuce leaf just so that the children don't have to suffer through the excruciating pain of eating the raw glob of horseradish. But
Well,
yeah, what
I
am I
was
gonna
going
say?
to say, I find horseradish very pungent, and so what would be the original kind of like bitter herb in the Middle East? Because horseradish is like Northern European plant.
Well, that's the thing, is that somewhere along the way it got switched. I don't know for sure, but I do know this, that a bitter you would find everywhere in Israel, Palestine would be, and all through the Middle East, and now in the American Southwest and California, due to naturalization, would be white horehound or Marrubium, which is from the Hebrew, the maror, maror, the word for bitter. So that was probably an available bitter that may have been used that way. I don't know that they ate wormwood or mugwort, mugwort would be a little bit, teeny bit hallucinogenic or dream inspiring, we've found in modern times at least. But I don't actually know, but the herbs offered in the temple are more kind of related to sweet marjoram and wild oregano or things like that, or like
And so they'll have a little hot with a bitter, a little zing to the bitter.
and they were offered in the temple,
Oh,
and
okay.
they didn't offer bitter herbs in the temple. So it's a distinct class, and like I say, at one point in history, it was important to eat bitters. I found the irony of putting the horseradish in a lettuce leaf is that if you let the lettuce bolt, it would be nice and bitter. And so I thought,
Yes.
well, they're getting one species there. So yeah, um so at any rate, that's Passover and celebrating, and the use of the bitters there. So and then all the food is kind of ritualized or has significance. So okay, which is an interesting way to have rituals or have food. This then did become part of Easter, which disconnected from Passover. At some point, the Europeans in particular said, well, we want our own calendar. We'd rather take over the pagan calendar than the Jewish calendar. So Easter got a little bit separated from actual Passover. And but they ate bitters as well. But I haven't really studied this. I just know that it exists, that there were bitters that they would have in Catholic or Eastern Orthodox religion. And they might have been borrowing from the Jews, or they might have just been doing what people there are 8 in the spring. I don't really know. If somebody knows, they can fill us in.
Yeah, put it in the chat if you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, and then other people never made it into a ritual. Like, I mean, I'm sure that the Native American people, the Indian people, that they did eat bitters in the spring like everybody else, but um I've never heard that they had any sort of sacred or ritual significance. So, and in the South, if they're doing that, it's almost certainly coming from Britain and so on.
I would assume it was like of European origin, came over the settlers.
Yeah, yeah, to where it's not quite ritual, but it's really close to a ritual almost. It's like you eat your bitters, you know.
Right.
Yeah. And by the time we get to Minnesota, it was really, yeah, it was Northern European settlers and they were using dandelion greens was just about it. And if you can believe this, so Minnesota settled basically, well, this is a letter from the Art Godfrey home, Mrs. Godfrey, built in 1854, and they're settled there 1855, 1856. And she sends for her cousin in Boston to send him out some seeds of the dandelion because we don't have any dandelions here. Holy cow, what a change. Now, I'm not sure how well they propagate from, well, they must propagate from seeds because you see the things floating around, but the dandelion is actually a self-pollinating clone. And well, hopefully that worked for her. And she got some dandelion greens, but that's how essential it was. And we know that I believe that the pilgrims brought dandelions with them too. Yeah. And what else did I see about? Oh, so talking to the old farmers, the old people who died off, people the generation before me, this would be their parents and grandparents. So old timers that were living when I was young, they always went out and ate the dandelion, particularly the Germans, and the English had died out. Art Godfrey and all those people that settled Minnesota, they sold their homesteads to move to California, made their money. They got there first and sold out. So, but the English and the Germans, they all ate dandelion greens. The pilgrims coming off the ship, they brought it with them. So, so dandelion greens, but you can only have them for a little while before they turn very bitter. Okay, now I myself don't really use the greens. Maybe you do. I use the root. I just have gotten in the habit, and they definitely have very different properties. Just real quickly, because we're not going over dandelion so much, but dandelion root is very good for the liver and gets the secretions going there. So a real basic liver, the most basic liver remedy, kind of both in commercial herbalism and practitioners practicing herbalists, would be dandelion root, milk thistle seed, and St. John's wort. And that would kind of be a number one. And uh but Oregon grapefruit and barberry root that we'll get into, they would combine, and they're much more bitter, and they might have some additional pop. Oh, so yeah, do you want, so I've talked about dandelion root, so I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot, although the mapped tongue is almost 99 out of 100 times it'll work for dandelion root, meaning the heat is sunk down into the bones and into the bones sometimes and into the muscles and tendons at least. And then you need I know of no other remedy for infection in the bone, which is terribly hard to treat either um allopathically or herbally, unless you have dandelion. Then it's 50-50. You can certainly improve it. Um, so yeah, I've talked about it enough. Do you use dandelion leaf then independently, and how do you use it?
I really don't use dandelion leaf. It has always been like a green here.
Yeah.
And I have heard, I haven't tried this, but I have had friends and students who say if you take the dandelion greens and put them on your cutting board and chop them and let them sit for about 15 minutes, a lot of the bitter dissipates
Oh,
and they become much more palatable. So
Good.
I've only ever used the root medicinally, and I have used it, of course, obviously for the liver, but it's also a potassium sparing diuretic. So
Yeah.
it's also really good for kidneys, congestive heart. Anytime you're storing water and you need a diuretic, and you're storing water inappropriately because of some other health issue in the body, I think dandelion is always really good in that situation.
Yeah, but
And
actually,
go,
in
go ahead.
comp, it usually is the leaf. The leaf is more diuretic than the root, so
I've
that's
only ever used the root, but I take your word for it. You've got more experience with the leaf than I do.
well, I just paid attention. I looked at the bottles in the herb store and they were
Got it. They're a leaf.
considered more diuretic, so and the root more bitter alterative. So not that I mean cleaning out the kidneys is also alterative, gets rid of bad blood, but it's more diuretic. Yeah, and exactly. Yeah, I remember one client saying she was on Lasix and I gave her, and she's no longer, she got off Lasix. I gave her a dandelion leaf, just the bottled from a store. And she said, "Oh, yeah, it works just like Lasix, except it takes the water out that's in the wrong. I can feel it goes to the wrong, where it's in the wrong places. Not whereas Lasix just indiscriminately took all the water out. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
It has intelligence. Yeah. So it's one of the top simple diuretics with nettles, parsley, and dandelion leaf, maybe juniper berry. I don't use couch grass that way, but that would be one. Um, so just real simple, non-toxic diuretics, which are important to remember as you age, you may need them.
I also think it takes the root takes the heat out of the liver when the
Oh,
liver's on, what I call liver heat. When the liver is under a lot of stress because it maybe is working really hard to detoxify. Let's say you had to be on a drug for a while or an antibiotic or high blood pressure, whatever it is you're on, and it makes the liver have to work really, really hard. And I think and it becomes, the liver becomes really tense. And I think dandelion kind of relaxes the liver, helps the heat move out of it, but it doesn't affect how the drug is working if you need to be on it. So
oh,
I think,
yeah, it's not like a St. John's wort. Yeah.
no, so you can do that with your prescription medications, most of them. I'm not going to say every one of them, obviously, you need to look that up, but I have found it really safe with
Yeah.
most prescription medications. And the liver just kind of relaxes, the bowel movements improve, everything in the body works a little bit better.
Yeah, and like I say, so deep heat, that's the liver, as well as the bones, tendons, ligaments, etc. And the map tongue is one where there's heat. The Chinese would say it means that the heat is baking down the fluids and the fluids are catching the heat. But the fluids can also just be your tissues too, so it's caught.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's do American ginseng, which you're much more of an expert at than I am. And
Yeah.
of course, it does grow from northern Minnesota and it's a big crop in northern Wisconsin and southern Canada all the way down. I don't know how far south. It doesn't grow the Gulf of Mexico, does it? But
Yes, it does.
God, it go, wow, that's incredible.
It grows to the Gulf of Mexico. Anywhere there's kind of like some hardwood forest. So when it gets into southern Alabama, it kind of shifts over to the western part. And
Oh,
then it kind of comes back
yeah.
over to mid Alabama. It follows the forest. I have had ginseng harvested in Mississippi. I've had wild ginseng harvested in Louisiana. I've had it harvested in Arkansas, Missouri, any southern state, Wisconsin, West Virginia definitely is kind of like the home of massive amounts of wild American ginseng right now.
Yeah,
Um,
maybe because they didn't get all of it some time ago. Also, ginseng, it seems to me, likes those hillsides and
mhm.
more I think that people picked out the populations that were easier to get at, so what's left? Like, when I was young, it was already picked out of the woods, that wasn't already cut down
Mm.
for farming, so there were pickers that would go along the Mississippi, which is like this, the banks, if you could call them banks, the cliffs and things. And they would go in those places and they'd find the ginseng because it had been pretty well picked out elsewhere. But there's still ginseng, and yeah,
Yeah,
and
there is.
yeah,
And fortunately, because of kind of like in the 80s and the 90s, the old ginseng harvesters, hunters, we call them hunters. You hunt ginseng, you pick any other herb, but you hunt ginseng.
right.
Um, so the old ginseng hunters, there was a whole generation it kind of skipped where people wanted to hunt ginseng for a living. So I think that really helped some like populations come back. So it might even have skipped 2 generations where like the old codger ginseng hunters didn't have anybody to pass on their knowledge on how to do this to, because nobody wanted to do it because everybody had better jobs that, didn't want to traipse around the woods. And I think that's helped in a lot of states, ginseng populations return.
Yeah.
So like that's true in Alabama. We had a couple of generations where no, that wasn't the main living for folks anymore.
Yeah.
And so people weren't out picking and it gave ginseng a rest. And I think this is true in most of the country.
Yeah, it wasn't so true up in the Midwest. They started
Mm.
picking them in the 80s again, pretty heavily, or just a few pickers are enough to. I mean, this is a lot of ginseng in the north originally, but yeah, but they didn't get everything. I remember one time in the woods, pretty heavy woods, and with Karen Sanders and a bunch of students, and God, we ran across a ginseng, so the ginseng will lay down a layer for each year, how
A
old it,
scar.
yeah, and it gets taller and taller. This was like this tall from the root. It was that tall of scars. We didn't count them, but it was like 75 years or something. It
Oh
was
my God.
phenomenal. Yeah,
Wow.
we did not pick it. Yeah.
Well, the older the root, the more somebody will pay you for it.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
right. Would have been thousands of dollars. Yeah.
Seriously, it could have been thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
I know in China at one point, somebody in China does not really have wild ginseng anymore because
No, no.
it's so overpicked and it's all domesticated there, which is why they love our ginseng.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, they
and
aren't changeable completely either. So
No,
yeah.
they're not, but they don't have any kind of wild ginseng anymore. And so someone found one that they guesstimated was like 125 years old. Is sold for $500,000.
My God.
Yeah.
Wow. Maybe I'll go back and
Seriously, over $500,000. That's
wow.
how prized it was.
Yeah, well, back in those coulees, I don't even know how to get back in there. I mean, there were roads. I could find 3 of them that were like that. I might pick one, but I wouldn't take anybody with me.
So
But
I'm sorry.
no, yeah, so they are different, the Chinese red ginseng and the American white ginseng. So yeah,
I think the red ginseng is more heating.
yeah,
The white ginseng is American ginseng. It's called white ginseng, and it is not as hot.
yeah,
Or by that I mean not as stimulating on the body as the red or the Korean. So it's a little considered milder on the body, though it's still stimulating. And I do want to point out if you're in the woods, I'm sorry, Alberta, could you go back to that picture of ginseng again? I'm so sorry to make you do that. All right, if you notice, it's quinifolious, it has 5 leaves.
yep,
And that's how you can tell it's getting mature. It's got 5 leaves. The other plant in the forest that might trick you into thinking that it's ginseng is actually Virginia creeper.
yeah,
And it'll grow up on a little stalk in the woods, even though it's a vine, it'll like put up a tiny stalk, but it's got 5 leaves. So you really have to note that this is American ginseng is on a stalk and then it makes leaves, where Virginia creeper is actually on a vine running along the ground, and it only looks like it's on a stalk. It's actually just the stem coming off the vine.
Yeah, it runs up trees too. And
Yeah.
we call it Boston ivy too, at least in the north, and it's on houses. It's the vine that's on a lot of houses. So it's not at all uncommon, and it's native to North America, so it's native in the woods. Yeah.
It's native in the woods, and it will run along the ground and get really thick. Big patches on the ground here. And of course, it will run up a tree or up the side of your house. But it's also just very happy running along the ground. And people go, oh my God, big patch of ginseng. Ha 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 ha. No, it's not.
No. The other plant that looks a lot like ginseng is its cousin, wild sarsaparilla. Looks a lot like it and actually tastes kind of like it. And actually, that's like it is used similar. Like in fact, it's kind of Indian Viagra. That's like a joke.
Well, American ginseng is used for that too. I recommend it often
Right.
for that.
Chinese, of course, the most, but so a substitute for, a very similar, it's got to be is the well, yeah, the wild sarsaparilla might be a little warmer. Yeah, the other cousin is Aurelia racemosa, the spikenard, that's much warmer. They're all ginsengs, they all have that adaptogenic effect, even if they're not official adaptogens, where they help the cortisol probably to kind of keep the inflammatory chemicals, the inflammatory hormones in check so that you don't overreact to